Welcome back. You're watching SA Today. Let's take a look at some business stories now. The National Youth Development Agency says that they're concerned about the increasing rate of unemployment in the country. This after Stats South Africa revealed an increase in unemployment rate. It reported that the number of unemployed people increased by 62,000 to 6.2 million in the first quarter of this year. Well, for more on this, I'm now joined by NYDA Executive Chairperson Sifiso Mtsweni. Thanks very much for joining us. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Good to see you, Peter.
All right. So the last time we spoke, we were chatting about the youth and why they didn't show up to the elections. And at that stage, we didn't realize this horrible figure was unfolding of unemployment. And the youth are the most unemployed. So all of this very much related. As the NYDA, when you heard that figure, what were your reaction and thoughts?
Well, we're completely concerned. In fact, we're quite angered. You'd remember that last year we had raised this issue quite sharply. And the response was that there was a job summit that was actually convened, followed by an investment summit, where commitments were made, particularly by the private sector, to start really investing in job creation in our country. The Youth Employment Service was launched, which would also encourage the private sector to really come on board. Because sometimes we tend to make this issue of unemployment a government issue. The role of government is to create a conducive environment for investment to happen. And I think over the last few months or so, there's been a positive investor confidence in our country. But we think the biggest problem here is that you've got 400,000 graduates sitting at home with degrees and diplomas because someone somewhere decided that, you know what, for you to get a job, you need 3 years experience, you need 5 years experience. We've called for the removal of that experience, because immediately when you do that, you are able to create space for 400,000, because it's not like jobs are not there. When you open newspapers, jobs are there. When you go to the internet, jobs are there. The problem there is that you've got all these barriers to entry, which are there. So one of the things that, and we're very happy, this morning the president was addressing, the investor, conference, and he was quite emphatic on the need to create space for young people, but the need to remove experience as an entry-level requirement. But I think there are quite bigger aspects as well that we need to look into, because if you look at the stats themselves, they tell you that the biggest chunk of these young people who are unemployed are those between 15 and 24. Now, in our view, when we're 15, 16, 17, probably 18, you should be in some form of education, training, and vocational skills development. Now, the reality is that a lot of young people drop out of the system, especially in grade 9. Most of them are not necessarily academically, gifted. So now the TVET sector, the technical and vocational skills, are there to actually take those particular young people. We've got a program called the Collins Chabane Youth Build Program, where we said with Public Works, let's revamp all the old government buildings. And in that way, we're able to take young people, train them as carpenters, train them as painters, train them as electricians, so that they're able to...
your own admission, training isn't the problem.
Yeah.
We've got graduates, we've got people coming through the system. It's when they leave these educational institutions, they have no jobs. Part of it, you said they're going to take away the experience requirement, which is great. That might partly solve the problem. But let's really unpack it and say, where are these jobs coming from? Is it the private sector? Is it public sector? And which part of the private sector? Because I would put it to you that the large businesses have pretty much employed as much as they can, and all that's happening is marginal. New employment is going to come from new businesses. Isn't that where the focus should be?
Well, look, I don't necessarily entirely agree. In fact, the private sector has been bleeding jobs. If you were to make a closer analysis, whether in the mining sector, whether in the manufacturing sector, we've actually been losing jobs. And I'm saying the second point is that government in our country, quite strangely, it's actually the biggest employer. Whereas government is not supposed to be in that space. Government is supposed to create a conducive environment for that. But I think one of the things that we say, and I like your last point, we need to create industries in the SMMEs, and we need to create an environment where we remove red tape and we allow SMMEs to thrive. But another thing that we've actually proposed is that we need to reopen our factories. You remember in the past, there were factories in the rural areas, in the townships. We need to be able to engage. In the last investment summit, we actually engaged hotels. And we said to them, Here's your curtains here, here's your linen, here's everything else in the rooms. Where are you sourcing this particular linen from? Here are youth cooperatives. Let's train them to actually produce this particular linen, because in that way you create jobs at a larger scale. And also, when you look at clothing itself, if you go to any retail store, you find that most of the clothes are actually imported from other countries. Why can't we ring fence, certain aspects of the textile industry, so that we re-engineer, that particular thing on the ground, so that it employs young people? Another thing that we came up with, Peter, we said that, government must start providing free sanitary towels for young girls, particularly in high schools. We've actually developed about 4 cooperatives, one cooperative based in Limpopo that actually manufactures these sanitary towels. Right. Let's buy from them so that we are able to create jobs. So what we actually argue is that let's go back and create local jobs instead of people flocking into the big cities and really looking for jobs that are actually not there.
All right, so again, the other challenge that we have is there's this push for don't look for a job, be a job creator. Yeah. So we're almost trying to create an entrepreneurship environment. But the reality is not everybody should be and can be an entrepreneur.
Yes.
How do we find a way to sift through and identify those that are entrepreneurial, help those, and that's what you do as the NYDA, and then the others find a way to get them into employment?
Well, I think one of the things that really has happened over the past few years in our society is that generally there has been low entrepreneurship activity. In fact, when people go for entrepreneurship, they use it in a way as a scapegoat to try and escape the situation that they find themselves in. In fact, I welcome what the president was actually saying, that isn't it time for us to start introducing entrepreneurship at school level, so that within that particular sector you can actually say, here are kids who are good in maths and science, they're engineers. Here are kids who are probably going into medicine. But at the same time, here's a pool of learners that can actually become entrepreneurs. Let's train them. Let's make sure that they understand what entrepreneurship is. As you know, even within entrepreneurship and businesses, there's various facets. You've got people who deal with governance. You've got people who deal with strategic thinking. You've got people who deal with operations. So it's only those who can understand how entrepreneurship actually works that will actually, understand that. But the bigger problem here, Peter, is that those who are actually entrepreneurs, the problem is that the system now sends them from pillar to post. Just for you to register a business, you are told you must get a tax clearance, you must run elsewhere, you must go and open a bank account somewhere. And after you've done all of that and you're looking for funding, again, your credit record is put on the line. And in fact, our banks have become so stringent. That is why what we did as the NYDA is to show government that, look, we can actually put in place a system that can be successful without us having to put all this red tape. And one of the things that we're saying to the Sixth Administration is that in kickstarting this entrepreneurship, let's remove the red tape and ensure that we encourage entrepreneurship and we employ young people on the ground.
All right, perhaps as a final question, one of the other things that I hear from small businesses all the time is all we want to do is concentrate on what we do, the businesses that they run, but they're up against a lot of legislation, labor laws that they find extremely difficult to manage, things to comply with, and they're saying that this is putting them off employing people because a lot of them become unfireable. And the unions also, a lot of power, and that just puts off employers, and they just say, I'd rather not, thank you very much. How do we balance all of these forces?
Well, I think that there's a bigger, issue there, and mainly can be ideological. South Africa comes from a very difficult past where really people were enslaved, particularly in the big business sector. And one of the things that we've continuously said as the youth of this country is that workers themselves must form part of governance structures, of the ownership structures of the economy, because in that way workers themselves will understand that production must actually lead to positive results. And I think we must also encourage workers themselves to be able to participate in the SMME sector. I don't think that we need to look at it from that particular aspect, because once we look at it from there, we're simply driven by the bottom line. I think we need to create a conducive environment where both workers and business owners can actually coexist and be able to take our country forward. So for me, I think that's the path that we need to actually follow in order to move forward.
All right, Sifiso, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed. It was good seeing you again.
Thank you very much.
All right, that's the Executive Chairperson of the NYDA, Sifiso Mtsweni, giving us his thoughts on how to solve this crippling unemployment rate, 27.6% at the last count.